Dr. Reddick is the Associate Dean, and I apologize, Rich, I do not have your biography in front of me, but
It's fine.
Dr. Rich Reddick is a double alum of Harvard University, which is where he received both his master's and PhD. He also currently fulfills the role of Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging, or Inclusion, in the the College of Education at UT Austin. We're colleagues in that space. He is also a full professor in the College of Education at UT Austin and leads a leadership institute as well at Harvard University in the summers where he teaches. In addition to that, Dr. Richard Reddick currently resides in Austin with two brilliant young children and his wife, and is proud to claim his Jamaican heritage as well, and is lauded as a writer for having authored at least 2 pieces in the past 10 days. And I will say that is an incredible feat. 2 pieces in the last 10 days, one of which was, and Rich, I'll defer to you to explicitly share the titles, but was around John Henryism. Mm-hmm. And the second of which is what his talk will be regarding today, is related to racist iconography, particularly looking at Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and many others, which falls in close alignment with our current exhibition at the Calaboose African American History Museum, which looks at blackface and minstrelsy, reimagining blackface and minstrelsy. So thank you so much. I know that was somewhat of a long introduction, but I wanted to make sure that we underscored the value that you bring to the space and contextualize it for our viewers.
Well, thank you, Skylar, and thank you all board members for inviting me. Everything that Skylar said is true. I'm actually an Air Force brat, but I moved to Austin in 1986. So I do consider Austin my hometown. I'm from Southeast Austin, I'm from 78744. So I feel a connection with my neighbors down south. So it's always good to have a connection there. So I'm excited to be here. And as Skylar said, ironically, I was telling you about my own sort of sense of, kind of feeling overwhelmed right now. And I'm probably not doing a good example of protecting myself against John Henryism, actually. This period that was really accelerated by the death of George Floyd and essentially kicked into motion a number of things that led to me writing pieces, was a time where myself, Skylar's one person I think about, we end up doing a lot of work, because we're in the space to educate folks. And a lot of times that effort falls on our shoulders, and we have to be mindful ourselves about how we take care of ourselves. So I'm getting a little bit of a wake-up call myself. I do think it's something to do with this allergy stuff, but nevertheless, it's kind of ironic that I wrote that, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not necessarily modeling this behavior the best way I can. But yes, I did the op-ed for Fortune about this very issue of John Henryism, because people didn't know much about it. I actually learned from a colleague of mine at UT. Essentially, the idea is, Black folks go work twice as hard to go half as far, right? It's something we've often heard. And of course, the story about John Henry, he dies because he's trying to outrace the steam engine to bore a tunnel. So it's the same kind of issue that is exemplified by Black professionals and Black workers, period, when they're trying to basically tread water, try to move ahead by just treading water, that kind of desperation that we often feel. And it's not just psychological, it's also physiological too. And actually, at the beginning of that piece, you'll see there's a reference. I don't mention Skylar explicitly, but we had a conversation at a march about the work that we had taken on, and it kind of spurred me to say, like, this is a time when we're all doing extra work, and I'm sure you're all in that same category, doing extra work, trying to get these issues in front of the community, and we all need to be mindful of who's being taxed by that work. Now, the CNN business piece was actually interesting because every so often, I don't even know how to explain this, but I've done a lot of public scholarship. I kind of consider that something I really gravitate towards as a scholar. I'm a first generation college student. I think if I'm writing pieces that my parents read or people in my neighborhood read, I'm doing my job. I mean, I'm excited to get things published in journals, but I'm much more excited to get things published that people every day can read and not behind a paywall somewhere at the university. But CNN has reached out before. I wrote a piece probably about 2 years ago about Megyn Kelly and her basically embarrassing debacle around blackface. So they asked me to do that piece. It performed pretty well, I guess. And they said, Rich, so do you hear about the thing with Aunt Jemima? I'm like, I did. And they're like, well, would you be interested in writing something? And I'm like, wasn't really thinking about it, honestly, but sure. And so I wrote a piece. And it's funny because the piece that ended up being published is a little different than what I originally pitched it as, because the original pitch was really much more about minstrelsy and its sort of pervasive imagery that's conveyed throughout American society and how we either take it for granted completely, but it's really everywhere. And once you see it, you can't ignore it. And they wanted me to talk a little bit more about sort of corporate representation a little bit, and that was a fine move to make. But I thought it was really interesting to just go into these sort of deep dive into minstrelsy, because the minstrelsy period, from about 1830 to probably about 1950 or so, it was a dominant form of entertainment in this country. And we often sort of, oh yeah, I think I've heard of Al Jolson and Daddy Rice and these other folks. You may have heard of them or you may have seen them, but Amos and Andy and all these other things, Little Rascals, all these different things that are tied to it. And it's kind of hard to unsee once you start seeing it. And of course, the first question comes up is like, well, why do we still have those images? Even with the absurdity of trying to modernize. So of course, you probably remember Aunt Jemima getting a perm versus the handkerchief over her head over time. So she was made more modern. But nevertheless, the absurdity of a Black woman serving you pancakes doesn't really make much sense. And especially when you start looking at the old sort of imagery that was used with a very stereotypical accent that she would use, and all the sort of characterized depictions that existed. And of course, you've got Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and, Rastus from Cream of Wheat. I mean, it goes on and on. So it was really interesting to kind of think about. These are images that I also grew up, kind of just accepting too. I didn't wake up one day and say, oh my God, this is terrible. You just grew up with it. And it kind of relates to one of the themes of my piece, which is Beverly Daniel Tatum, amazing author, psychologist, wrote Why All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. Really one of the best primers on race relations, I think. Really writes about racism being part of the smog we all breathe in. So it's just very normal. If you grew up in the United States, you've adopted this stuff. You've grown up with it. In fact, my mom reminded me, and I, as an Air Force brat, I lived overseas, lived in England for 10 years. And I remember, if you know anything about British marmalade, Robinson's Marmalade has the gollywog, which is a terribly trope, stereotypical character, black hair, kinky hair, big eyes, red lips. And you actually order a gollywog doll. It was just there, right? And then my mom told me, she's like, we moved to Florida back in the 70s. We went to Sambo's restaurant. I'm like, we did what? She's like, yes, we went to Sambo's. I'm like, huh? I didn't even realize this happened, So the ubiquity of the casual immersion into racial stereotypes is really something we all grapple with. So I often talk about these things by saying, the goal is really to get people to start thinking about what this means and what does it mean for somebody to see themselves or people in their community depicted in such a way, right? And so obviously minstrelsy is a tipping point, but we've got the same image concerns with Native Americans. So Land O'Lakes just changed their mascot, the Native American woman that was on the cover of the butter packet. They just changed that, but there's certainly a ton of sports franchises that use Native Americans as mascots in disparaging ways. So it's really, we're in a moment and things are happening, and I'm glad that we have attention, but we definitely need to keep this conversation moving. And we also need to stop falling into the trap of saying, well, this is an honorary thing. It's good. People are actually using that sort of defense for the Kansas City Chiefs and the Washington. I can't mention the name of the franchise. It's a racial slur, but it's honorary. I'm like, well, I don't really think that's most people would like to be called a derogatory stereotype. But nevertheless, it's something we're grappling with, and I just really enjoy the fact that we're having this conversation. And I will say what feels different about this moment is that it seems like there's much more attention about not just seeing these things come to an end, but actually investing in resources. So Adidas is a good example. Adidas came out and did something about Black Lives Matter. People kind of called them out, like, it's funny you say this, but you have a lot of things you have not done. And Adidas immediately came back and invested $5 million in the community, fellowship scholarships, hiring opportunities, those kinds of things. So that's what we're looking for now. We're looking for real action and real commitment to the cause. And this all comes down to a lack of, exposure to different perspectives. And those of you who follow management literature, you probably know that there's a huge body of literature that suggests that diverse work teams are really the teams that do the best work. They tend to be the ones that problem solve most critically. They tend to think outside the box. They tend to not fall into troped and stereotypical ways of belonging. And the irony of this, of course, is that Quaker Oats is a subsidiary of PepsiCo. And of course, PepsiCo a few years ago really stepped into it with the Jenner video commercial they did when there was a Black Lives Matter type of protest, and she gives the cop a Pepsi and everything's great. It was really like cringeworthy, right? And it's like, who was in the room when this came out? Like somebody said, this is not going to come across well. So, it's kind of getting to that point where we can start saying to ourselves, do we have the right people around the table when we're planning these kinds of things or marketing towards our communities? We know communities of color, queer communities are communities that actually spend a lot of money. So it seems very important to have that representation on boards, on leadership spaces, because if you don't, you end up with these basically cringeworthy experiences. And, it's far better to have this conversation behind closed doors and say, I don't think this is going to be the way we want it to come across, versus going ahead and launching something and then going through the public humiliation of saying, yeah, we were using a racial stereotype and it's kind of embarrassing. And certainly, I think it's really interesting because I saw more. There's actually, believe it or not, and I saw this years ago, Quaker Oats also has a brand called Darky toothpaste. I'm serious. It's been changed to Darlie, but apparently it's one of the more popular toothpaste brands in Asia. And so now they're saying, yeah, we should probably change that. And I'm like, yeah, you probably should. But it's kind of amazing how brazen it is. And I think it's also this idea of us just normalizing racial stereotypes in our society and thinking it's just how things are, nobody needs anything by it, that kind of thing. So yeah, I hope I'll put a link in the chat so you can take a look at it. But yeah, that's kind of what it was about. And a lot of folks pretty much came out and said, this is really important news to have. And generally good responses. I didn't get a lot of people saying, this is great. I did see some people commenting and saying, well, there was a Black woman who made, money being the Aunt Jemima mascot. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. When I said, I think it's possible to regard that at that particular point in time, that was probably a very limited economic opportunity she had. So I'm not really mad at her because of that. But I mean, at this point in time, we can kind of move past that. So I don't know why people were sort of making that an issue. Like, oh my gosh, you're just honoring the real Aunt Jemima. I'm like, yeah, I don't think you really are. I can appreciate and understand why she took that role on the time she did, because Aunt Jemima is a very, very old brand. It's 130 years old. So there were several Black women who served as Aunt Jemima. But yeah, that was what it was about. So that's kind of what I have. So I'd love to have a conversation, answer any questions, hear you all think about what you think about it, and certainly how your exhibit is sort of touching on these same issues.
Thanks so much, Dr. Reddick. I'm going to ask everyone, if you are muted, if you are currently muted and you'd like to talk, please unmute. Otherwise, please remain muted so that we don't capture any ambient noise. But let's please open it up for questions.
Skylar, I was wondering whether you had a discussion about how to interface Dr. Reddick with the exhibit. I'm imagining a lot of wonderful possibilities, which you've probably already thought of.
I think that's a great idea. I think well, I did share with Dr. Reddick the website link, which has a little bit about the exhibit and some photos. And of course, we can be found on Instagram and Facebook as well, which has more information. But I think without pressure, Dr. Reddick, certainly we can discuss. I know we're in the midst of a curious time, and so I want to prioritize health and social distancing, even with a vigilance that our political leaders may not have. That's the most important thing. So if and when we can engage, because we're actually technically not yet open as a museum, but when we are open, or even if you'd like a one-on-one kind of interface with this space to see it in real time, and certainly there are tons of pictures that I can also share with you, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And Scarlett and I have talked about this, but when I was an undergraduate student at UT Austin, Michael Ray Charles, who's an artist, he's at the University of Houston now, but he was actually a faculty member here, and we worked together on a symposium we have at UT. And it's one of those things that you just don't know because you're ignorant and young. I just thought he was a cool professor and he did interesting art. But I remember a few years later watching the Spike Lee movie Bamboozled, and then realizing all the artwork, all the Mammy figurines and so forth were done by Michael Ray Charles. He was an artistic consultant on the Spike Lee movie Bamboozled. And, you know, it's kind of this interesting idea of reclaiming that imagery and doing something with it. And Skylar and I were talking about that fascination of that movie, is that movie really was misunderstood. I think people thought it was simply, look at this terrible portrayal, but it was really a critique of what was happening in Hollywood, right? That there's always this temptation to do exploitative sort of art, and often not consider the consequences on the community. And of course, every person has some complicit behavior in this, right? So to walk away and say, well, you know, blackface was, and, you know, minstrelsy is terrible, and white folks were doing all these terrible things. I mean, that's definitely true. But black folks were also involved in it too. And I think even learning about the histories of folks like Louis Armstrong or Sammy Davis Jr., you realize that they were involved in this sort of art form. And musicologists that actually argued that, you know, it's very hard to dismiss this creative space of American culture, right? And certainly you have to be very careful with it. But the fact of the matter is, this is how many Black entertainers or Black entertainers found ways to enter society and earn livings, right? So it's just a very fascinating thing. And it reminds me actually of Childish Gambino's This Is America, which I'm sure many of you have seen. And of course, in the very beginning of it, people were like, why is he making those weird faces and that contortions? He's actually imitating Jim Crow. He's actually imitating that style of dance, and, you know, having the no shirt, and sort of having the large eyes and the exaggerated facial expressions. Just really interesting because, again, I mean, if you just sort of notice it and say, oh, he's just dancing strangely, he's actually making an homage to that form of imagery that was so pervasive and part of who we are as a culture. And so that's what I'm left with. A few years ago at UT, we had a exhibit at the Harry Ransom Center about vaudeville. And of course, vaudeville and minstrelsy are very much tied together as well. And so we had a lot of conversations about that. And you might remember Nelson Linder and some folks from the NAACP really did not like how that went down. But again, I think we needed to have a conversation as a community and figure out how do we grapple with this, because I don't think the response is let's just eliminate these things and get rid of them and pretend they never existed. We've got to give some kind of context. And again, with the musicologist talking about what do we do with Stephen Foster's music? What do we do with the songs that we all grew up listening to in folk music class, right? And it's just, this is the consequence of living in a world of white supremacy. We're left with this puzzlement about how we're going to progress and advance as a society, but not necessarily move ahead without having any cognition of what happened in the past. I don't want to become a place where we have no past because the past is harmful or deficient or somehow problematic.
Dr. Reddick?
Yes.
Do you have a point of view on the debate around the eyes of Texas?
Ooh, there it goes. I do. And it's actually an evolved sort of perspective, Dr. Holt, because, as a person who went to UT, I remember distinctly, I moved here in 1986. And if you're a Texas Longhorn fan, you'll remember 1986. The Lady Longhorns went 34-0, undefeated. And that's how I got to know the Texas Longhorns. It wasn't through football. We weren't that good that year, but it was through basketball, women's basketball. And I saw people doing work on the railroad with this hand gesture. And I'm like, that is weird. But it became part of like the natural sort of flow of things. And of course, when I became a student, I became an orientation advisor and I did all the things. I was one of the guys who sat on the sidelines with Bevo. So I was really involved in the UT sort of spirit experience. And every so often I hear somebody say, well, we didn't know what it was. We didn't know where it came about. The reality is I got my Texas Traditions book out by Margaret Berry, 1973 publication date. On the first page, he says, it was performed at a minstrel show. And I don't know if we just glossed over what that meant or we didn't want to think what it meant, but it was there. And so my colleague, Scott and I, our colleague, Ted Gordon, has been particularly thoughtful about talking about the origins of the song because it comes from both what I call a racist adjacent sort of space because it was performed at a minstrel show. And it's a phrase that the president at UT at the time used when kind of his hashtag when he'd sign off on a speech. And he actually got that from Robert E. Lee, who was the president of Washington College in Virginia, where he attended. I don't know if the students knew this or not, but the bottom line is it was a parody of the president's sort of catchphrase. Since then, I think you can make an argument that is it possible to move and reinterpret origins by what it means after that point? And I think it's possible. Is it possible for the eyes of Texas? I'm not sure. We need to have a conversation as a community. And I actually, at first, had the reaction that many Texas X's have, which is like, don't change it. Why would you do that? And I thought about it. I'm like, if it makes people uncomfortable, if it makes people feel objectified, if it makes people feel that they've been they're not part of this conversation or part of this community, I have a problem with that. And I think our sense of community is strong enough that we can create new traditions. I always tell people, UT, the tower has not always been there. That's a new building, right? Old Main is gone. There's tons of parts of UT's history, and don't get me wrong, it's a very longstanding part of our history. But history changes all the time. I don't want to ever become that person who becomes an anachronism and says, "Oh, you can't change history." We change history all the time. It's not that issue. What I want us to have is a conversation as a community about what it means. And I've heard a lot of creative ideas. Rob Babers has talked about, can we reference Julius Whittier, who was the first Black letterman at UT, in the song? Can we change some words? Those kinds of things are interesting to me. I think I'm interested in these other permutations versus saying, let's get rid of it or let's keep doing it. Neither one of those things feels completely comfortable with me. I certainly don't feel anybody should have to sing or, do anything with it if they don't want to. That's a big thing. And I was meeting with our athletic director, Chris Del Conte, and I told him that. I said, if students don't feel comfortable singing it, I hope that that's not going to be any kind of problem for them, because they shouldn't have to sing a song that makes them feel uncomfortable. And frankly, one of my mentors who went to Morgan State University, HBCU, says, y'all should just jazz it up and, funk it up, get a new vibe to it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what traditions do, right? Traditions evolve that way. In fact, Eyes of Texas was not even the school song. There was an actual school song that was written. Nobody liked it. The Eyes of Texas came up as this prank, and it became adopted as the school song. So yes, I very much believe that it's left to us to be creative about how do we think about this. But I really want us to have a conversation as a community and valuing all the voices about how it makes people feel, what folks feel about a reinterpretation. Some people will say, it's not possible to reinterpret this. It's too much embedded in it. And some folks will say, actually, when I think about Barbara Smith Conrad, who was one of the first Black graduates singing the Eyes of Texas in her mezzo-soprano voice, gives you chills when you hear her sing it. Or my friend, Jonathan Fleming, who was a Black drum major, leading the band Eyes of Texas. I kind of think, wow, that means something to me to see that happen. So I guess it's a long way, Dr. Holt, of saying it's complicated, but I think it's really about having a conversation. I hope that we have a conversation. We don't just come to some, we're not doing it, or we're definitely doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions for Dr. Reddick?
I actually would like to segue that talk, if no one else has any anything else to add to his talk, because I think it's a perfect bridge to Mr. Sterling Riles, who has just joined us. So, Dr. Reddick, one of the things that you said is that three things stood out to me in your closing, which was history evolves and it's always changing. The other one is you said, and I again, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, is that we don't want to erase all of history, everything that's bad in history. And I think the third thing that you said is community, and leveraging all the voices of community is paramount to these discussions. And so I think that is the perfect bridge to Mr. Sterling Riles, who is with us. So hi there, Mr. Riles. Thank you so much for joining us, who is, and I'm going to give an informal bio. I hope you don't mind, Sterling, and I hope you'll correct me if I misquote anything. But Sterling is not only a man of service in terms of community engagement and activism, but also in terms of duty. He is a veteran and has served in tours serving the United States, who has returned home to Lockhart in a new role, or I should say not a new role, but a more evolved role, which is really, and he's humble, so he would never self-identify this way, but I respectfully attribute a degree of reverence to it. He is very much someone who is activating and standing alongside other activists in the community of Lockhart. And most centrally, he has spoken to local politicians around the removal of a Confederate monument that sits on the grounds of the courthouse in Lockhart. And I'm saying this in adjacent to discussions that are happening all over the world, not only in the United States, not only at UT Austin, not only in Lockhart, but all over the world. And so certainly, Dr. Reddick, I hope you'll stay with us, because I think it would be great for the two of you to also dialogue in our presence and in community around this issue, to have varied perspective. So without further ado, Mr. Riles, please share your journey with us and what you hope to achieve and obtain, and the why.
All right. Well, there's one thing that I need to correct. I wasn't. I'm not a veteran. I am a Department of Defense contractor. When I work with all the various departments of the United States government for the last 13 years in war zones in particular, mostly CIA and State Department, and also special forces sites throughout the world. I just recently came back from Somalia in November, doing some operations with the government there. People, when they hear you say you deployed, they automatically throw you in the enlisted department. But I'm not enlisted, however. So I just want to make that clear. So, no worries. So since I've been back in Lockhart, since I've been back in the United States, it's been a trip because, like I said, I've been out of the country for 13 years. So I've not really in the last 13 years, I haven't really spent a lot of time in the U.S. to be able to address some of these issues that the nation has faced over the years. So now that I've been home and I've been trying to get settled, I come home to my hometown, which is Lockhart, Texas, and this monument thing just so happened to come on the screen in town one day. Somebody had posted a message on my Facebook page, and I was like, wait a minute, I remember my grandmother talking about that and warning me and my brothers to stay away from it. And we never really sought it out, but the elders have always warned, there's certain places you don't want to go, certain people you don't want to deal with, because of old time Klan in the area, which is still prevalent to this day. They're just undercover with it. So I went over, I had to go see it for myself. I verified that it was still there. And from that moment on, it's just like, I don't know if it was just me walking into the path that I'm supposed to be on or whatever, but everything just started clicking. And so far, God has been sending me all these wonderful people, and I didn't set out for this. I didn't go looking for it. I went to Commissioner's Court just to speak on, my personal feelings about the monument and my experiences with racism in Lockhart and the surrounding areas, and it's just blown up. Today, I went to war with the mayor, Lou White, because we had another rally planned for the 7th. And he's done everything under the sun to try to block and keep us from assembling. And we had him on the ropes. And then Governor Abbott passed this no crowds greater than 10 restriction today, which shot a big hole in a ship and basically sunk it. So it's just been an ongoing battle with some of these people that don't want to. It was never an issue today. When it was not about the monument. But the moment they realize that we can mobilize large amounts of people, minorities in this community like they've never seen before, now it's a threat. So, and that's what I finally cornered him, and I got him to admit it. Okay, look, it's not about COVID like he was saying initially. It's about the fact that you want to talk about this monument. He doesn't want the mayor doesn't want the monument removed. However, the commissioner, Judge Hoppy Hayden, he wants to see it gone because he feels like it's something we need to put to the side so that the community can heal. And there's a lot of division in the political spectrum about this, but I've been contacted by Texas Senator Ziffarini, forgive me if I mess her name up, and a couple of other officials and politicians that have all voiced their support. Right now, where we're at with it, we have a upcoming meeting where Commissioner's Court, instead of them going ahead and ruling yay or nay to move this monument, they kicked the can down the road. They want to form a special committee. At first, they were going to stack the deck with the Texas Historical Commission. Well, the problem with that is the main guy who's been speaking on their behalf has already voiced his stance, which is he doesn't want to see it moved. They want to put a plaque or something to contextualize the monument. And for me, that's not good enough. It does absolutely nothing for me for you to put a plaque out there because when I'm driving by in my truck and I look over and I see it, I don't get to read that plaque. I just see this big sign that says Confederate, across there. And it's an eyesore to me. And as I've said before, it's a symbol of terrorism to me and my people. And my parents, my grandparents, they had to be silent about it because they were constantly under the threat of retaliation, whether it be from Klan or whether it be from undercover Klan that it were bosses or political leaders or whatever in the town. They just would always say, hey, just don't worry about it. Don't even go by it. But those days are over. We're not here to duck our heads and make people comfortable anymore. That's why they existed. One of the main things people say is, well, nobody had a problem with it before. It's been there all this time. But they forget the threat surrounding saying something about this stuff. It was never that simple for us to just say, okay, well, yeah, we're just going to go along with it because, a lot of people, they weren't trying to rock the boat. But now people, they don't care. And I'm going to rock the boat until it sinks. So I'm in it to the end now, especially with them trying to outmaneuver us. So just coming up with a strategy every day to keep on pushing forward. And I'm not sure if y'all saw what happened in Gonzales for the June 19th assembly. Miss Skylar, I'm not sure if you participated in that one, but that's the one where those militia groups came and basically surrounded everybody. They put snipers all up on the public buildings, and they were, basically had the whole crowd surrounded with weapons while the police sat right there and allowed them to do that. And here we are. We always out here unarmed. We have never talked about violence or looting or any of that. And we've never even given any evidence of remotely even leaning that away for them to come out and respond this way. And so that pretty much enraged me. So I let Judge Hoppy Hayden, I went and met with the Sheriff Lane, and also with the mayor. And I let them know that, we can't, that's not going to be tolerated by us. That's the last time I let somebody be around me with weapons and I not have a weapon on me, because we have a long history of these crowds of people all of a sudden snapping and turning. All it takes for one of them to get upset about something and he can unload, just lay us out, and we could never even defend ourselves. And I got the police standing right there not doing anything. So I have no faith that they're there to protect us. And I gave the example of St. Louis to back that up, where they slaughtered 200 people in 24 hours, women, men, children, old folks. And they did it without any regard to anything. If your skin was black, you was dead. And all the remaining black folks in that town became refugees instantly in their own cities. And you got police that participated in that, and others that stood around watching. So I have no faith that they're going to protect us. Your safety is your responsibility. And I tell people that all the time. The government tells us that, and a law enforcement will tell us that. They've said numerous times, we're not there to prevent a crime. We're there to figure out what happened after the fact. And with that type of apathy and logic, I got to protect myself, and our crowds need to make sure that we're protected. So if this is going to be their ongoing response to our peacefulness, then we may need to change our posture. And that's what I had to speak with the mayor and the sheriff about, because if they're going to keep allowing these people to show up like that and try to be intimidating, just like their statues that they're trying to defend, then we're going about this the all wrong way. Martin Luther King was peaceful and he ended up dead, and that's what I tell them. So that's what I'm battling, and that's where we're at with it right now. So we're looking at holding a vigil for Miss Vanessa, who they found her body, I guess, today. So since they tried to shut us down for this farmers market meeting, we're going to shift to supporting Miss Vanessa and see that she gets justice in her murder, and we'll reconvene on this when this restriction, I guess, is lifted up. So that's where I'm at.
Wow, Sterling. Thank you so much, Mr. Riles. There's a lot. There's so much that you said. It's chocked full of history, of personal testimony, of generational storytelling and lived experience, of revisionist history that exists, not only in the nation or in the South or Texas, but also within our very intimate communal spaces. And even as Dr. Reddick pointed out, even in the way that we're indoctrinated in our education. So I appreciate you speaking truth to that and shedding light on that, particularly as what resonated so deeply with me is that you'd said it was your first recollection of being advised to not even come near the monument was with your grandmother. So you're talking about at least 3 generations of impact that's in your recent recollection. But I'll stop talking, and I'd like to open it up to the other members of the board and guests to speak to anything that they've heard. And then I'd like to ask you, Sterling, if once we do that, if you could share what your ask is of the Calaboose African American History Museum as well. Okay, Diane.
I had a quick question. Thank you, Sterling, for all that, just really very tragic history. But I'm not familiar with this statue, so I have 2 questions. What exactly is this monument? And what is the mayor's, what's his defense? Why does he want to take it down? What did he tell you?
It's just a monument that was erected back in 1923, 4 days after a huge Klan meeting was held in Lockhart, Texas. The monument, their story is that it was erected for the sons that were drafted into the Confederacy to fight the war, who had no knowledge of what they were fighting for. That's the crazy story that they want you to believe. However, in Lockhart, Texas, at that particular point in time, they were having Klan meetings at the newspapers up in the attic. They were having big Klan meetings weekly. They were held inside the newspaper attic for years. Lockhart was a place where Klan would rally and meet, and some of the other surrounding areas and surrounding towns. So, the Daughters of the Confederacy went around and they started erecting these monuments. And, the statue may have duality to it. They did it for one thing, but they got 15 other reasons why they did it. Sundown towns. Hey, at a certain point in time, if you're Black, you better be out of town. They did it to let you know that, hey, you're not going to find justice here. That's why they put them in front of these courthouses. You're not welcome. When I see these monuments, that's what it says to me. You're not welcome. You won't find justice here. And that's what I went to the courthouse, to the commissioner's court, to tell them that when minorities walk in here, whether it's Black or Latino, when we look and we see these monuments that's erected right there on the steps, and you walk in that court and you look to the left and you see a Confederate flag, and then you look to the right, you see that Union flag, and you want me to believe that I'm going to find justice there? And we wonder why the sentencing in the United States is harsher for minorities. We wonder why that, first time offenses, they're throwing the book at these minority kids and minority men and women, So for me, it's not rocket science to why the system is so broken. It was designed this way. And they keep trying to say we're erasing history. There's nothing erasing history by removing a monument that was erected for intimidation. We got the internet. In the age of internet servers, it's impossible to erase history. So it's nonsense. It's a deflection tactic. We have books. I've never went to any of these statues around the United States, but I know where they're at and I know what they're standing. I've never been to Rushmore, but I know where it is. I know why it's there. But I also know about the tribes that and burial grounds that surrounded it, and why they put it up there as, again, a symbol of intimidation, to say that, hey, we're we're better than you, we're higher than you. And that's why they erected it in such a high place like that. But the mayor's defense is we don't want to erase history. That's all of their arguments. We don't want to erase history. And then my response to that is, how is moving it less than 600 yards across the street, across the highway, erasing history? We're moving it to a museum where it can be preserved. How is that erasing history? We're putting it into a museum where you can then contextualize it and write all the little BS narratives that you want. How on earth is that erasing history? They're so opposed to moving it because they feel like they're losing that power, that they feel like they receive when they put it there. I'm doing this for my great-grandfather, my great-great-great-great-grandfather who fought in World War I, World War II. I had a grandfather and grandfathers that fought in those wars too. We had people in our families that lost lives in those wars too. So why do you get to honor your family while spitting in my family's face? And then turn around and tell me, but you don't have the right to say, hey, don't spit in my face and stop disrespecting me because this is my heritage. So your heritage is better than my heritage, is what they're telling us. That because it's our history, your history don't matter. And I also told them, I was like, when you walk around this square, I was like, you don't see any other minority groups' stories being told on these squares. How many Latino leaders is on those squares? None. How many Asian leaders are on those squares with their contributions to the United States? None. How many Black people stories are being told on that square with those monuments and statues? None. So how can you sit here and tell me it's about history and we want to honor history? Well, to me, what I've learned from listening to them all is like, we want to honor history, but just a particular part of history, certain people's history. And that's the problem. Let's stop with the crap and just call it what it is. Like, hey, this ain't about history. They feel like some of these people are triggered by the fact they feel like they're losing that status that they put themselves on in the country. And it's uneasy for a lot of people, to feel, for them to become the minority. It's uneasy and unsettling for a lot of people. And somebody asked me to post it on my page. It's like, they want me to have an answer to humanity. It's like, I never said that I have the answer to cure all the issues of mankind. I just wanted the statue removed, but people are like coming at me with, wanting me to solve the duality of man and all this craziness. I'm like, look, be a good person. Surround yourself with people who don't always think like you. Don't surround yourself with yes people. Do good to people when nobody else is looking. Don't do something good for somebody for something in return. Go out and try to help as many people as you can while you can with what you got. I don't have a whole lot right now, but I spend every single day in the community helping people. Since I've been back from Somalia, I've literally go every day of the week, except I'm trying to stop on Saturdays and Sundays, but I haven't been able to do it fully yet, except for Sunday. Last Sunday, I finally got a day off, just do nothing. But if you was to see where I'm at, this is another elderly lady. There's a lot of elderly people in the community that's been abandoned. They've been ripped off by carpenters, by people. They don't have family that interact with them enough to know what's going on. And, these carpenters, good carpenters are expensive. And so what me and my boy did, we just been riding around and we just helping people, fixing what other people have messed up and, doing it with whatever resources we got. And it makes a difference. And we're not doing it for that type of recognition. We're doing it because it needs to be done. Somebody's got to do it. Now, after we finish tearing down all this stuff, this is where Black folks got to come on with it. After they remove all this stuff, and if they're going to keep tearing up stuff and burning up stuff, if we don't do something with those communities afterwards, then we'll look like complete and utter fools, just like in Los Angeles after they tore up the neighborhood, burned it down. I went back and it was still burned down and tore up, just like New Orleans, and it hasn't gotten any better. And that absolutely cannot happen this time. And that's what has me so worried about what's going on around the nation. Yes, the core cause is good, but what are we actually going to do afterwards? We've been talking about group economics for freaking forever, and we have yet to effectively implement it. The schools, the cell phone towers, the hospitals, the banks, the farms, and all this stuff is a must. And are we prepared to do that? Are we actually prepared to stand on our own? And I'm not saying that we should stand on our own, because I've met, especially through this, but just like 13 years, I've met awesome people from all over the planet. I could never say I hate, this entire group of people based off of the experiences I've had with a limited number of people in that group. I could never do that, because some of the most awesome people that have had the most profound effect on me didn't look like me. And some of the worst experiences I've had in humanity came from other people who did look like me. So I can't ever get into that box. And a lot of people, especially lately, have been trying to get me in to say, hey, don't deal with, these people. I'm like, are you stupid? And I just go off, don't bring stupidity like that. That's not going to solve anything. But what I want to see happen now with this, with your museum, is since the mayor and this other commissioner are trying to stack the deck for this special committee with people from the Texas Historical Commission who are in opposition to the monument being moved. And their reasons is, number one, funding. But we came up with the money in like 3 days, and we got a quote to get it moved for like $4,000, and we got the money like almost instantly. So we eliminated that before they could even bring it up. So they were shocked when Cody hit them with that in court. It's like, we already got the money, don't worry about it, and we got a quote, and they can move it today if need be. So then they came back and was like, well, no. And this was the brother on the commissioner's court, who could have solved and deadened the entire thing. He goes, like, I'm gonna lose friends if I just vote to have this thing move. It's a delicate situation, we can't just be too hasty. While the other 3 commissioners were like, hey, let's move it. And then there was one lady that wanted to put it on the ballot, and so then they were split. But the brother could have ended and deaded the whole thing. And he's actually related to me, so I was really upset with him that he did this. But he, because of his stance, they kicked the can down the road, and now they're talking about a special committee, which they're trying to add the other commissioner. He's trying to stack the deck with people from the Historical Commission who traditionally don't want to see the monument moved. They're citing funding and preservation. And they're the ones that are pushing for this thing to have a plaque put next to it to contextualize it and blah, 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 that type of stuff. So what I would like is to get another museum's perspective and, possibly cite why it can be moved and preserved, how or whatever, or just give an opposing stance to the Historical Commission stance, so that they just can't solely go off of the Historical Commission like this commissioner is trying to do. He wants to use, these are the professionals. Well, let's get a couple of professionals' opinions other than just this one. So then that'll neutralize his stance, or that angle that he's trying to go. And then it's just going to come back down to y'all commissioners. Y'all going to have to do what you were elected to do, and that's make a decision. And as I told them, and I told them again today, these crowds are going to get larger, and they're going to get louder, and they're not going away. So you're going to have to make a decision. And if you choose to keep it where it is, they're going to keep getting louder, and they're going to keep getting bigger, and it's never going to end, because we're not going to keep sitting here and letting you disrespect us. Plain and simple.
And you know something, Sterling, you said so many beautiful things you just said. And I think, first of all, I hope that you are taking care of yourself, because I'm like, you're doing a lot of work by yourself. You need to make sure you are preserving yourself and do what you can do to make sure you're not going to wear yourself out in this work. But I'm also thinking about sort of the moral debt. This is Gloria Ladson-Billings, who's an educational researcher, talks about, American history. There's a moral question that we rarely respond to, right? We often respond to an economic issue. We respond to like gaps in education, achievement, and so on and so forth. But she often talks about, well, what about the moral issues, right? What morality does a nation have to basically propagandize? And we've got plenty of examples across the world of how do you remember objectionable parts of history. So the Shoah, I mean, our friends who are Jewish understand this, you never forget. And they have invested so much in the memory of the Holocaust to make sure that nobody ever forgets what took place. But you don't go to Germany and see a Luftwaffe or a SS statue anywhere. In fact, that's probably the one thing that most people from other parts of the country, or the world, when they come to the States to me, they say two things. Like, first of all, do you not know where you're at? Why are there so many flags? Like, do you not know that you're in the United States? I'm like, yeah, we do, but people like to have their flags out. And then, of course, seeing the St. Andrew's flag and seeing the United States flag is a contradiction. It doesn't even make sense. That is a flag in rebellion to the Union.
Right.
They don't go together.
Right.
they do not fit.
Exactly.
So it goes back to this propagandizing. That's what it was. We have to be honest about what it was. The Daughters of the United Confederacy are the little old ladies who basically have executed the most successful propaganda campaign in U.S. history. Because if you are like me and grew up in the South, you had books that were approved by these people. They were on all the textbook adoption boards. Even to the most recent time when we heard the textbook saying, well, these Africans were, uncompensated laborers. That's the kind of propaganda that they have put forth. And we have to start being honest about that and saying, chattel slavery was a horrible, horrible thing. There's no such thing as a quote unquote good slave owner. It's not possible. It's incongruous, especially in a country that purports to have moral fiber and moral background. It is a complete moral failing. And when you think about people like William Barber, folks who really talk about this, I mean, it's what it comes down to. Let's put aside all those other pieces and talk about the morality, what it means when our children, when our visitors, where our community members see these statues, and what it tells not just kids of color, but white kids. It tells white kids something too. You're better than these other people are. And that's how we need to stop talking about this as being something that only impacts people of color. This harms everybody, especially white folks. And I think this is the argument I really want people to start understanding. And I'm really pleased by this work, but also I'm pleased what I'm seeing nationally when I see the Karen videos and I see white folks saying, wait, stop, I'm not having this. And they're the ones getting up and saying enough. Not black folks saying, stop doing this stuff, but white folks. I don't know if you saw this the other day, but it was in New Jersey and a white woman came up and started fussing at the guy who's a lawyer, by the way.
In Montclair.
Yep. In Montclair.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know, like in an hour, white neighbors came out and picketed the woman's house. I'm like, that's how you do it. I mean, you're responding to that moral shortcoming. And that's what we need to start talking about. What is the moral standing of a society that allows inequities to persist this way and doesn't do anything to address them? Because it's just a simply questionable thing about morality. Is it morally correct to put people on a statue that were traitors to the nation that we are a part of? That makes no damn sense. It's that simple. It's not complicated. And like you said, Sterling, it's so easy to, the Briscoe Center at UT Austin has put Jefferson Davis's statue in the museum. There is an exhibit there. You could understand that statue was controversial from when it went up there in 1920 to when it went down in 2015. You can understand the context there. And in fact, I know people who are descendants of Jeff Davis who said, yes, take it down. Like, we don't want that up there anyway. So yeah, people need to be real and stop trying to hide behind these, fancy, history. No, it's a moral question. And if you want to be morally bankrupt and say, It's acceptable to honor traitors. It's acceptable to honor people who did not believe in the dignity of human life. Then just own it. Just say it at least.
Right.
I mean, if you say that, and I'm like, okay, you're morally corrupt, but okay, at least you said it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's
And then
no,
go ahead.
Sterling. I was just going to say your point about the statue also ties to San Marcos and the Klan, and Dr. Holt can speak about that, a piece that you may not have known, and it was only a few months apart, where there was a Klan rally where we had a few tens of thousands of Klan members descend on San Marcos. So, but please, you go ahead, and then I'd like Dr. Holt to speak to that, to connect that dot.
I just was going to speak to his point about the white folks that have been turning out around here have been awesome, and sad to say that in the rally, it was more whites and Latinos than it was black people that showed up to fight for the cause. And I noticed that around the country, that in some of these areas, a lot of them are more animate and just vicious about fighting against racism than it seems some of our own people are. And that's just perplexing to me. I'm like, you sitting over here all calm, but I don't know if it's because people have been whipped into this, or bought into this docile mode, or this, I don't know, some call it a Martin Luther King dream speech, and then put people to sleep to where they're so docile, or what. But even Malcolm snapped out of that closer to the end of his death. But I mean, they've been, freaking awesome, and relentless in their pursuit for this. And, they're the ones who have taken me even deeper down this than I had planned on going. But, they're not going to cave, and they're not going to give up, and they're crafty. And, it's been an eye-opening experience. And if they're going to be that put that much energy into it, then I have enough respect for not only the cause, but also them to match that energy and take it up a notch. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sterling Riles. Thank you tremendously. Dr. Rich Reddick had to depart. He had another issue he had to move towards, but he texted me to please extend his thanks to the board and to say, Sterling, you are a treasure, quote unquote. So again, I think you've moved everyone on this call. I was privileged enough to hear you before in Lockhart, and now I would like to, I think we lost, okay, there he is. I want to actually ask Dr. Holt to connect the dots, if you don't mind, Dr. Holt. As Sterling shared, the monument went up in, wasn't it November of 1923?
1920.
And then
well, here in San Marcos in 1926, 20,000, can you imagine, 20,000 Klansmen descended upon San Marcos for a parade down the middle of town. And they celebrated for 7 or 8 hours here. And as I always tell people who come to the museum, San Marcos was a Klan-friendly town. The Klan here was treated like the Rotary Club. They were fine gentlemen, as far as they were concerned. But I wasn't aware that they were also active in Lockhart. So,
oh yeah,
yeah. So this was a hotbed of Ku Klux Klan in this area.
Mm-hmm.
They're still in Bastrop.
Still in Bastrop, absolutely, yes.
And I don't know if y'all get the Southern Poverty Law Center magazines or letters. I'm a part of the Southern Poverty Law Center, so that they're always sending me their magazine, and they'll always have a map, and it'll show you where all the hate groups are. There's also a lot of hate groups around Canyon Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, between Austin and San Antonio, we're not in a good spot at all.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
It's scary.
Didn't know that.
I have a question for Sterling. So I'm not from this area, but I wanted to go see the Lockhart courthouse last week, not knowing there was a monument there at all. So imagine my surprise when we arrive and there's this Confederate monument. And I'll send you guys a picture I took. There's the Confederate monument, and I got a picture like adjacent across the street is a window with this huge BLM sign. And I thought, wow, this is like totally contextualizing our times in which we live. So I got this great picture and I thought, what's the deal? Is there a movement in Lockhart? What's happening? I haven't really heard of a whole lot. And then just last week, I started hearing I guess it's a group that you're involved with as well. Like different people are protesting there, and there was a cover over the monument, and then that got removed. And then they've had some militia groups show up in Lockhart as well. And I'm just really surprised at this reaction from the THC. Just, I am a public historian. I know a lot of historians involved in that particular institution. And all of the ones I know are totally supportive of removing these horrible monuments and recontextualizing them inside of a museum. So I guess my question for you is like, where is this museum going to be located in Lockhart? Because I think like some of us that have different contacts, we can explain that a little bit better. I'm personally going to reach out to THC and the contacts I have there. My professors at Texas State, all of them are on board with removing these monuments. So I'm just appalled that THC is pushing back and kind of being the voice for the other side, because this is completely ridiculous. But what kind of a museum is kind of on tap for the recontextualization of that particular monument?
So Lockhart has a they put a lot of different things at. My mom used to work on the Texas Historical Commission's board.
Uh-oh. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Now we can you start over, Sterling?
Oh, okay. So what part did I cut out on?
Your mom.
Oh, yeah. My mom was on the Texas Historical Commission's board for like 12 or 13 years. And we would have to go over to that museum that she was working at. And it's this property. So you have downtown, and across the street, there's a big red 2-story old contemporary building with cast iron picket fence around it. And that is a museum that's been in existence for forever, after it was converted from a jail to that museum. And then also they have a Confederate cemetery. So one of the places that they were going to move it was to the cemetery to be with the Confederate soldiers, but that's county. So it's two different jurisdictions there. And so they're making it seem like it's such a hassle to get the county to sign off on moving it there. And then they start talking about the money again. So we was like, hey, if we get the money, then what's the issue? So then, it's always a little something, just a little moaning and groanings. But right now, the county commissioner, Judge Hoppy Hayden, my bad, he wants to move it to the jail, where it will be either put in the front or the way the building's set up, it can be seen from 3 different sides. So it doesn't really matter where they put it. And they asked me my opinion on where I think. I was like, I don't care. Just, put it on the museum property. Nobody can be mad that it's on the museum property because that's what it's there for, to be preserved there. So as long as it's not middle of the town square in front of the courthouse, I don't really care. But yeah, so basically right now they have it designated to go to the jail, which is serving as a museum for at least 30 years or so now. That's where they have it slated to go.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Sterling.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to respect Mr. Riles' time, and I also want us to put on the board to vote on his request for a letter of support that presents another historical preservation perspective. because I do respect and understand that time is of the essence for you, Sterling. And waiting until August to our next board meeting, I don't think would do you too much good. This is an issue that is urgent, and I imagine you'll also be speaking to Commissioners Court well before then.
Right.
Okay. So let's see. Let me see. I think I may have the ability here to do a poll for a vote.
Yes, go ahead, Skylar.
So I was looking for the poll option, but I don't, for some reason. What's that?
You need to make a motion first.
Yes, I absolutely am. I'm going to follow Robert's rules, but I was looking for the poll just in case, so that people could do it in that window, but I can't find it. So is everybody okay with doing it in this platform? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So at this point, I move for the Calaboose African American History Museum to write a letter of support that also provides information on the value of housing and / preserving monuments that honor the Confederacy in a museum. And it's specifically this particular monument in the museum, as opposed to the courthouse grounds in the town square of Lockhart, Texas, per Mr. Sterling Riles' request.
I second the motion.
Aye.
Okay, let's, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion carries. We will get the letter out, Mr. Riles, and let you know when it's ready.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sterling.
Thank you for all your work.
Yes.
Can I mention one thing that's related to this whole subject? I know I've been told recently there's a movement in San Marcos to try to get that Jack C. Hayes statue taken down. Every time people of Mexican American descent are asked about it, they just say, yeah, he was shooting Mexicans. I don't know why we put that up like that. I came here and it went up rather quickly afterwards. Nothing to do with my coming here, but it was like the romantic version of being a Texan. And here we have this guy shooting, and who's he shooting? Well, he was shooting Mexicans. And so I didn't start it, but there is a movement going right now to that you probably will hear more about soon, to get that taken down. So it's an interesting segue off of the Confederate flag, Confederacy.
What's the name of it? What's the name of the person or thing that they've got a monument to?
Hayes. It's right at the courthouse. It's the first thing you see when you get to the courthouse. It's this guy with his pistol up in the air. Yeah.
Really
Hayes County.
I'm
Hayes
surprised
County.
he has put like a poster, a police brutality type poster up in response to that particular monument, just because of the horrific issues with the Texas Rangers and the Mexican community in 1915 and other issues. I haven't seen that in town, and I haven't been to town often because of COVID, but I haven't seen anything around that statue at all.
Not yet. I think it's just getting started to address that. Yeah. So keep your ears open. It might, it should become, it might even be Mitty who started that. I'm not sure. Your grandmother, your auntie, I mean.
No!
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. What was that?
Okay. I maybe, I don't know. So... well, I just feel like this has been so rich. I don't know about you all, but I feel so full. Like, I feel like it's been awesome. I feel that we've been poured into by both Mr. Riles and Dr. Reddick Thank you so much. We will move to get that letter to you as soon as possible so that you can circulate it and share it as you need. And certainly if you, I don't want to, again, belabor your time and commandeer your time on the call. So if there's anything else that you need from us or have any additional questions, please do feel free to ask. And if not, feel free to go home and rest. As you said, you've not had a day off in ages, please.
I'm going to try, but I thank y'all. I thank y'all for y'all's time. I thank y'all for y'all consideration in this. And I'm going to do my best to try to get some rest after I go clean this yard up real quick before the sun go down.
Well, I'm your accountability partner. I'm going to stay on you, Sterling.
All right.
We need you. We need you to be healthy. So take good care of yourself, please.
All right. Y'all have a good night.
You too. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.